Did you know that runic systems weren't just Norse? Britain actually had its own set as well. Let's talk about this alphabet together in our next series. In the next 28 to 33 weeks, we'll be learning about the Anglo-Frisian Futhark. The Anglo-Frisian Futhark was the runic alphabet that was used in Anglo-Saxon England and the coastal areas of Frisia, according to Britannica. These runic systems actually had a little bit of an overlap with the younger Futhark time-wise. Runologists like Raymond Ian Page and Elizabeth Okasha state that the alphabet was in use from about the 5th to 11th century CE. However, unlike the younger Futhark, the Futhorc has a lot more runes, and oh boy do I mean a lot. 28 to 33 or so, with each representing sounds in Old English. We know that the names and meanings of these runes come from later medieval sources such as rune poems and inscriptions. These literary works show how people wrote and remembered all 33 runes in most cases. Most pronunciations are reconstructions and inferred based scholarly estimates. Like the Scandinavians, inscriptions of the Futhorc were found upon preserved materials such as stone, wood, metal, bone, and late post-Christian manuscripts. Unlike the elder Futhark, we have poems that explain and remember these runes, including the Old English Rune Poem. The script was used for both a writing system and symbolically, believed to be used in rituals and commemoration. In this series, we'll be focusing on historical and cultural context primarily, how these runes were used, what their meanings were, and how later sources interpreted them. It's very important to note that I will not be claiming precise Old English pronunciations, since most of what we have are reconstructions, and I'm pretty horrible at pronouncing things. Finally, this series is also part of my own personal study. Feoch comes from Proto-Germanic fehu, appearing in Old English meaning wealth or cattle. Livestock were incredibly important to early Anglo-Saxon communities. The animals weren't just a symbol of wealth, but also a social standing and economic security. Owning them often provided economic and social leverage through trade. They could be used to pay fines, such as wergild, which compensated families for injury or death. In Anglo-Saxon rune poems, feoch is consistently associated with property, trade, and prosperity. The Old English Rune Poem states, "Wealth is a comfort to all men." The word also shows how communities valued societal responsibilities tied to wealth, like obligations and relationships. Feoch also mattered beyond material goods. Later medieval sources and modern interpretations associate it with success, personal achievement, or the flow of resources. In some traditions, it's interpreted as a reminder of the responsibilities associated with wealth. Ur comes from Proto-Germanic urus, appearing in Old English meaning aurochs, a type of wild ox that once roamed Europe. While aurochs were not a domesticated animal, they were still important to Anglo-Saxon communities symbolically. They were believed to symbolize endurance and power. As we learned with feoch, cattle and livestock provided economic security and social influence. The Old English Rune Poem states, "The aurochs is proud and has great horns." The word also shows how communities valued physical and social endurance. Strength was also connected to an individual's role within society or the ability to support one's family. In later medieval sources and modern interpretations, Ura's symbology includes traits such as perseverance and determination. In some traditions, it's interpreted as a reminder of the personal and communal strength required to face challenges. Thorn comes from the Proto-Germanic thorisas, appearing meaning thorn. You know, like the sharp part of a plant. In early Anglo-Saxon communities, thorns were natural hazards. Some plants included brambles or hawthorns. The rune represented a symbol of defense and physical protection. Additionally, it included the idea of boundaries and likely encouraged awareness in daily life. The Old English Rune Poem states that the thorn is exceedingly sharp to any warrior who grasps it. These communities recognize the need for defense, both in practical matters like guarding property or livestock. Thorn can also serve as a warning against challenges in some interpretations. Later medieval sources and modern interpretations included thorns, symbolism of caution and the ability to navigate obstacles. In some traditions, it's believed to be a reminder to notice potential threats and protection. Os comes from Proto-Germanic ansus, appearing in Old English meaning God or divine being. In early Anglo-Saxon society, this rune represented spiritual power, authority, and the influence of divine in daily life. To communities, the role of higher powers in guiding decisions and protection and even fate itself were integral. The Old English Rune Poem states that the source of all speech comes from the mouth. It emphasizes that the expectation that people act responsibly within both social and spiritual lives. Later sources expanded os' symbolic meaning to communication, knowledge, and insight. In some traditions, it's believed to be a reminder to seek understanding and wisdom. Rad comes from Proto-Germanic ræðo, appearing in Old English meaning ride or journey. In early Anglo-Saxon society, this rune symbolized travel and movement. Journeys were sometimes roadless and dangerous, connecting settlements and enabled trade by supporting obligations across the land. The Old English Rune Poem states that riding seems easy to every warrior while he's indoors. It also calls for courageousness from the back of a stout horse. This shows that travel was part of daily life, which required endurance and preparation. In later instances, they extended Rad's meaning to planning and forward motion. In some traditions, it's interpreted as a reminder to approach journeys, literal or personal, with intention and care. Chain comes from Proto-Germanic kainas or kauna, appearing in Old English meaning torch or flame. In early Anglo-Saxon society, fire was life or death. A torch gave warmth and light, as well as security in dark places. Bonfires and hearths made it possible to work and gather indoors after the dark. The Old English Rune Poem states that the torch is known to every living man by its pale, bright flame. It always burns where princes sit within. This shows how fire supported comfort and activity within the mead hall. After the Old English poem, chains meaning expanded to knowledge, skill, and illumination. In some traditions, it's taken as a reminder to use insight and ability very carefully, since the same force that helps can also harm. Yuvu comes from Proto-Germanic grebo, appearing in Old English meaning gift. In early Anglo-Saxon society, gifts had obligations attached. Giving was tied to loyalty and friendship as well as status. A gift of varying quality could create alliances or honor someone's work or service. The Old English Rune Poem states that generosity brings credit and honor, which supports one's dignity. This shows how giving freely created bonds and set expectations between kin groups and individuals. Later medieval sources and modern interpretations extends yifu's meaning to partnership and cooperation. In some traditions, it's taken as a reminder that relationships are supported by exchanges of time and effort. Win comes from Proto-Germanic wunjo, appearing in Old English meaning joy or delight. In early Anglo-Saxon society, joy was more than just a feeling. It came from shared meals and the security of kin and comrades in the hall. The Old English Rune Poem states that, "Bliss he enjoys who knows not suffering, sorrow nor anxiety, and has prosperity and happiness and a good enough house." Happiness or joy was heavily collectivist rather than individual pleasure. Various sources would later extend win's meaning to fulfillment, harmony, or some sort of emotional balance. In some traditions, it's taken as a reminder to appreciate stability and comfort. Hail comes from Proto-Germanic hagalas, appearing in Old English meaning hail. In early Anglo-Saxon society, hail was a familiar danger. Storms and microbursts could flatten crops and harm livestock. These storms came suddenly and left people with little control over the outcome of the carnage. The Old English Rune Poem states that hail is the whitest of green and is tossed about by gusts of wind. This shows how hail could look harmless, but could cause major damage when it involved crops and livestock, which, if you all remember, animals meant wealth. Later, the rune's meaning changed a little, to sudden setbacks and resilience. In some traditions, it's taken as a reminder that difficulties can strike without warning, but they eventually pass. Naud comes from Proto-Germanic nauthus, appearing in Old English meaning necessity or hardship. In early Anglo-Saxon society, need was understood as pressure, the force that pushed people to act. Need showed up in many forms, like hunger and sickness or even lack of resources. It often required help from family or community. The Old English Rune Poem states that trouble is oppressive to the heart, yet it often proves to be a source of help and salvation. Among the populace, hardship was recognized as painful, but also as something that could teach, spur action, or strengthen bonds. As time went on, Naud's meaning shifted to discipline and effort. In some traditions, it was taken as a reminder that people could grow from challenges and that urgency often reveals what truly matters. Is comes from Proto-Germanic isa or isan, appearing in Old English meaning ice. In early Anglo-Saxon life, ice was seen as a seasonal danger. Frozen rivers blocked travel and trade routes. Slippery paths threatened people and horses and even the occasional cart. Ice also created hardship, since it stopped work in the fields and could isolate settlements from one another. The Old English poem states that ice is very cold and slippery. It glistens as clear as glass, and most like to gems. While something could be beautiful or seem harmless, it can still cause damage or hurt someone. Later traditions expanded the rune's meaning to include pause and restraint. In some interpretations, it could mean not every obstacle can be overcome by sheer effort alone. Patience or waiting out conditions, weather, or simply life interruptions might be the wiser action. Jaar comes from Proto-Germanic jæra, appearing in Old English meaning year or harvest. In early Anglo-Saxon life, the year could be measured through the cycle of farming and seasons. A good harvest meant individuals and families, as well as communities, could survive another frigid winter. Meanwhile, a failed harvest could result in hunger, debt, and loss, including life. Jæra represents the concept of time and its passing. However, it also included that reward only comes after hard work. The Old English Rune Poem states that summer is a joy to men when God suffers the earth to bring forth shining fruits for rich and poor alike. This passage showed that the hardship of winter came for everyone regardless of status. Later medieval and modern interpretations pushed jæra toward ideas of cycles and timing. In some versions, it's taken as a reminder that results often demand patience and that growth takes a season of toil before it can be enjoyed. Ewe comes from Proto-Germanic erwas, appearing in Old English meaning yew. In early Anglo-Saxon life, the yew tree was recognized for its toughness and long lifespan. Its wood was also used for various tools, including both spear shafts and, most famously, bows. Yews also grew in graveyards later in the medieval period. This helped create its association with life, death, and the cycle of them. The Old English Rune Poem states that the yew tree is with rough bark, hard and fast in the earth, supported by its roots, a guardian of flame and joy upon an estate, which notes that the strength of the wood and how it could be used. Over time, later interpretation broadened yew's meaning to resilience and adaptability. In some traditions, it's taken as a reminder that strength can be quiet and that durability often matters more than force. Peroth likely comes from the Proto-Germanic perthro, appearing in Old English. Unlike many of the other runes in our list, its meaning is very convoluted. No single translation has been universally agreed upon by scholars at this time. Some do propose that it may be likely referring to a gaming piece or cup used for throwing dice. This is based on context from later historical sources, as we'll see in a moment. Others may suggest that general entertainment or gathering. It's important to note that none of these ideas are 100% confirmed. The Old English Rune Poem states that Peroth is a source of recreation and amusement to the great, where warriors sit blithely together in the banquet hall. The poem roots the rune itself firmly in the mead hall, where warriors relaxed and played games as well as shared downtime instead of fighting and working. Because the original meaning has been lost, more modern interpretations have been varied. Peroth has been linked to chance or hidden outcomes. In some traditions, it's taken as a reminder that unpredictability plays a part in life, and that shared joy helps people with that which cannot be controlled. Elks likely comes from Proto-Germanic alges, or elhaz, appearing in Old English meaning an elk stag or a sedge plant. Like Peroth, the exact origin is debated. Some scholars point to the elk, a powerful and defensive animal from the Cervidae family. Others connect the name to a sharp marsh plant called a sedge. Both ideas represent a form of protection. In early Anglo-Saxon life, danger often came without warning. The image of something that defends itself, whether an antlered animal or thorny marsh plants, lines up with how people understood the need to guard things that were important to them. The Old English Rune Poem states that the elk sedge is mostly to be found in a marsh. It grows in the water and makes a ghastly wound. This warns that this plant was particularly hazardous and travelers ought not touch the plant itself. Later interpretations and versions added additional meanings to the rune, including shielding and boundaries. In some traditions, it is a reminder to defend what matters to you and to remain vigilant against hidden dangers. Seal comes from Proto-Germanic solwelo, appearing in Old English meaning sun. In early Anglo-Saxon life, and even our modern times, the sun was more than light in the sky. It acted as a rhythm, a clock if you will. Daylight determined when people could travel and farm. Without sunlight, nothing would grow, and crops would fail, and animals and people would starve. The Old English Rune Poem states that the sun is ever a joy to seafarers when they journey over to the fish's bath. This shows how important the sun was not only to farmers but also for sailors and fishermen who might not have a compass, map, or a lighthouse to rely on. When we look at more modern interpretations of the rune, it represents clarity and direction. In some traditions, it's taken as a reminder that light helps people find their course, and steady direction matters as much as strength. Tu comes from Proto-Germanic was, appearing in Old English meaning the god Tu. He was connected to law and order. The deity was also involved with formalized and ritualized aspects of war, like oaths and duels. In early Anglo-Saxon society, fighting skills were important, but keeping oaths and acting with honor mattered just as much. The Old English Rune Poem states that Tu is a guiding star. It is ever on its course over the mist of night and never fails. As we previously spoke about the sun rune, we see here that people of the time used stars as navigational guides. Various interpretations saw a shift within Tu towards duty and self-control. In some traditions, it is believed that true strength includes restraint and the willingness to do what is right, even when that costs you everything. Brk comes from the Proto-Germanic brkanol, appearing in Old English meaning birch. In early Anglo-Saxon life, the birch tree came to be linked with ideas of beginning. The birch was one of the first trees to leaf and grow after winter. It signaled renewal and the beginning of spring. A quick note before we continue. Futhark is often translated as poplar. The Old English Rune Poem states that the poplar bears no fruit, yet without seeds it brings forth suckers. While the poem describes a tree similar to a poplar or aspen, the meaning seems to be waxing poetic surrounding regeneration, rather than strict botany. As we see in later medieval instances in modern paganism, the rune brk is associated with the cycle of life and recovery. In some instances, it's believed to be a reminder that new phases often begin quietly, growing from roots that may or may not be visible at first. Oak comes from the Proto-Germanic was, appearing in Old English as meaning horse. In early Anglo-Saxon life, the horse was more than just simple transport. Horses were natural technological marvels of their time. They allowed for travel, warfare, and communication across long distances in places that otherwise would not have existed without them. A well-trained horse was a symbol of status and survival. The Old English Rune Poem states that the horse is a joy to princes in the presence of warriors. The bond between rider and animal ran deep. The pride attached to a good horse stood apart from anything that people felt for cattle or sheep, giving the animal a role no other livestock filled. As time went on, the rune och shifted in more conceptual ways. In more modern interpretations within heathen and pagan communities, the rune came to be associated with alliances and mutual trust. In some traditions, it's taken as a reminder that progress often depends on cooperation rather than solitary effort. Man comes from Proto-Germanic monos, appearing in Old English meaning human or person. In early Anglo-Saxon life, a person meant more than his individual existence. A person had more. He had kin and a household, which were immensely important to society as a whole. Oaths and obligations were expected within society focused on honor. Identity came from a man's position within his surroundings, not simply because he deemed himself so. The Old English Rune Poem states that the joyous man is dear to his kinsmen, while also showing that every person inevitably leaves this earth. Yet every man is doomed to fail his fellow when death finally ends his duty. Later sources and modern interpretations linked man with cooperation, social duty, and shared responsibility. In some traditions, it is taken as a reminder that strength comes from relationships and that no one survives alone. Lahu comes from the Proto-Germanic lagus, appearing in Old English as sea, lake, or water. In early Anglo-Saxon life, the sea was a form of transportation, but it was also hazardous. Coastal trade and travel depended on water, but storms and unpredictable tides made these activities dangerous. The Old English Rune Poem states that the ocean seems interminable to men, and that the waves of the sea terrify them. This shows how people relied on water in many ways, yet it recognized that the sea could take lives as easily as it gave opportunity. After the Old English poem, the rune's interpretations broadened and Lahu's original meanings. They included themes of uncertainty and emotion. In some beliefs, it is taken as a reminder that life often moves like water, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, but navigating those changes requires steadiness. Ing comes from Proto-Germanic word ingwas. The word or rune refers to the god or heroic ancestor Ing, also known as Ingvi and Freya to the Scandinavians. The name shows up in later examples as an ancestral leader of the early Danes. Ing, or Freya, the Lord, is translated into Norse mythology and was linked with kingship, peace, and fertility. Ing, or Freya, the Lord, as translated in Norse mythology, was linked with kingship, peace, and fertility. The Old English Rune Poem states that Ing was the first seen among the East Danes, and that afterwards he departed eastward over the wave. Afterwards, he was named a hero to his people. Later sources associated Ing with growth, legacy, and continuity. In some heathenry and paganism beliefs, it is taken as a reminder that what a person builds, families, and stories can outlast the individual. Eithel comes from the Proto-Germanic Othala or Othala, appearing in the Old English meaning estate or ancestral land. In early Anglo-Saxon life, land was tied to identity. A family's rights, status, and the future were tied to the ground they called theirs. Losing it could mean losing freedom. Gaining land could elevate an entire bloodline across generations. The Old English Rune Poem states that the estate is very dear to every man, and explains how prosperity and security follow when someone thrives on their ancestral land. This captures how reputation and stability were tied to the land, not just what an individual owned. After the Old English period, interpretations expanded to themes of heritage and homeland. In some traditions, Eithel is taken as a reminder that roots matter, what you inherit from those before you, and what you leave to the people after you. Dai comes from the Proto-Germanic dagas, appearing in Old English meaning day or daylight. In early Anglo-Saxon life, daylight dictated a person's workday in almost every aspect. Work and travel depended on the sun, and most activity stopped once darkness fell. The coming of day meant safety and the continuation of work. It's important to note that this rune, while similar to the one for sun, specifically addresses day as a separate concept. The Old English Rune Poem states that day, the glorious of light of the Creator, is sent by the Lord. It is beloved of all men, a source of hope and happiness to rich and poor, and of service to all. Daylight touched all people, regardless of their status, and blessed all within its warmth. Society could not survive within a world solely of shadow. Later readings connected Dai with clarity and opportunity. In some traditions, it's taken as a reminder that conditions can change, and that each new day offers a chance to work, repair, build, or begin again. Ak appears in Old English meaning oak. In early Anglo-Saxon life, the English oak and the sessile oak were some of the most valued trees in Northern Europe. From mead halls to tools and even ships, the wood provided timber for many things. Oaks were a long-lived species, which were slow to mature and sturdy, making them a symbol of endurance. The Old English Rune Poem states that the oak fattens the flesh of pigs for the children of men. In a future series, we'll cover the entire rune poem, but for now, this part of the stanza shows how communities used oak. The tree provided wood for work and shelter, and its acorns sustained pigs and wildlife before slaughter. In more modern pagan circles, ak often carried meanings connected to endurance and reliability. In some traditions, it is taken as a reminder that strength comes from personal growth and the ability to withstand hardship. Ash appears in Old English meaning ash tree. In early Anglo-Saxon life, like the birch or poplar and the oak, the ash tree was valued for its strength and flexibility. Ash wood was used for shields, spear shafts, and everyday tools according to archaeological findings. Andrew Welton explains in his dissertation that a large portion of identifiable shafts in England and Scandinavia are made from the wood. It grew fast and straight, which made it reliable where strength and supply were both needed. The Old English Rune Poem states that the ash is exceedingly high and precious to men. Interestingly, we also learn that it was also highly valuable, as the poem would continue with, that the tree was attacked by many a man. This goes to show how much timber, regardless of the species of tree, was important to the day-to-day of Anglo-Saxon society. Heathenry and paganism after Old English period expands upon the concept of ash to endurance and the idea of being tested. In some traditions, it's an abstract reminder that usefulness comes from standing firm in serving a purpose, not from appearance alone. Ur likely comes from Proto-Germanic was, similar to a few other runes. Ur's meaning is unknown. In the Anglo-Saxon tradition, it's usually believed to have connection to the bow, as in the weapon. It's often assumed to be a yew bow because the yew tree provided the best wood for making one. In early Anglo-Saxon life, the bow was a common tool for hunting and warfare. Unlike a spear or sword, it allows someone to protect his household or bring down animals from a distance. This fit a society where food, defense, and survival were constant concerns. The Old English poem states that Ur is a source of joy and honor to every prince and knight. It looks well on a horse and is reliable equipment for a journey. A bow was a skill-focused weapon. You couldn't just hack away at something like you could an axe. The bow was seen as a symbol of status, and mastery of it elevates a person who carries it. Modern interpretations within both paganism and folklore expanded Ur, meaning to include discipline and precision. In some beliefs, it is taken as a reminder that focus and preparation matter, and strength sometimes works best from range rather than direct force. Ior appears in Old English. The name is usually read as eel or river creature. In early Anglo-Saxon life, rivers and marshlands were both an important but dangerous resource. Eels, fish, and other river animals were valuable food sources, but wetlands were hard terrain to hunt or farm. The Old English Rune Poem states that Ior is a river fish, and yet it always feeds on land. It has a fair abode encompassed by water. This may indicate that it could be something amphibious. We really don't know what exactly this creature could have been, but it's believed by scholars that it was possibly an eel, or as far-fetched as it may seem, an otter. However, eels and amphibious fish really fit the most as they move between water and shore and live in both conditions. As time went on, the meaning of this rune expanded ideas into more conceptual themes: adaptability and existing between worlds. In some pagan beliefs, it's taken as a reminder that survival often requires shifting between environments and handling uncertainty. Ar appears in Old English, meaning earth, grave, or even death. In early Anglo-Saxon life, death was not abstract. Disease, childbirth, war, weather, and hunger could take a person suddenly. This rune pointed to the physical end of life and the return of the body to the soil. The Old English Rune Poem states that the grave is horrible to every man. The poem makes the rune unusually blunt. It is the only rune that mentions the grave directly. It acknowledges decay, burial, and the finality that comes for everyone, no matter their rank. After the medieval period, Ar shifted from literal burial to the idea or concept of endings. In some circles of pagan and heathenry thought, it is taken as a reminder that every cycle finishes. Lives, projects, relationships, even the day, and that acceptance is part of strength. When the Old English Rune Poem ends with Ara, the runes do not. In later manuscripts, scribes add several more characters to record the growing sounds of Old English. Sometimes called Northumbrian runes by modern writers such as Nigel Pennick, these runes are not attested on stones or grave goods, and most have no poem, no mythology, and no confirmed symbolic meaning. Instead of working as sacred symbols, they behave more like practical letters, filling gaps that the earlier Futhorc did not cover. In the next entries, we'll be looking at calc, Weorth, stan, and gar. Some are clear words, some are mysteries, and none appear in the rune poem. But together they show how flexible and creative the runic tradition became right before Latin letters took over. Calc is one of those debated runes. Some say it comes from Old English calc, a word borrowed from Latin calyx. Alternatively, it could also mean shoe, as some scholars and runologists tend to debate. This said, chalk of limestone was heavily present in the area. In early Anglo-Saxon life, chalk was a useful common material. It could be used in various ways, like marking items used in pottery, mortar, and more. The white cliffs of the southern coast of Britain formed stunning natural boundaries visible from the sea. Chalk, or calc, is a soft, white, porous sedimentary carbonate rock and a form of limestone composed of calcite, the remains of floating organisms and algae, according to Britannica and GeoKansas. The Old English Rune Poem does not include calc, so its meaning has to be inferred from language and usage. The name resembles the Old English works calc, chalice, but no medieval source explains what it symbolized. Weorth comes from Old English and does not have a clear Proto-Germanic root. It appears only in late Old English manuscripts such as Cotton-Dominion and Galba. It does not appear in inscriptions and is not included in the Old English Rune Poem. There are no known inherited words in other Germanic languages and no surviving medieval sources. Further, the form has no accepted reconstruction, which is why runologists treat it as an Anglo-Saxon addition to the Futhorc. There are speculations surrounding this rune, and researchers debate the meaning. Early runologists such as Wimmer and Dickens suggest a link between hearth tools or a fire based on the rune's shape, while others, including Osborne and Barnes, have noted that its resemblance to Old English, wern, while emphasizing that no evidence backs this. Stan comes from Old English meaning stone. Unlike many earlier runes, Stan does not have a Proto-Germanic root as a rune name. It appears only in later manuscript rune rows such as Cotton-Dominion and Galba. It does not appear in inscriptions or in the Old English Rune Poem. Stone, however, was used heavily within early Anglo-Saxon life. It built boundary markers, grave monuments, burned stones for grinding grain, and occasionally walls and foundations. Stone could endure long after wood rotted, making it a very useful material to the people of the time. Because the rune has no surviving poem stanzas or definition, its meaning simply must be inferred from the plain word. Most runologists, including Page and Barnes, treat Stan simply as a naming rune, rather than for symbolic use. Gar appears in Old English meaning spear. As a rune name, however, Gar is not part of the original Proto-Germanic system. It only appears in late Old English manuscript rune rows such as Cotton-Dominion and does not appear in inscriptions or in the Old English Rune Poem. Spears are the most common weapon found in furnished Anglo-Saxon graves. They were far more common than swords and could be used for hunting or in warfare from behind the shield wall. As we learned previously, with ash, spears were often made from ash wood due to their flexibility and strength. While the rune was not included in the Old English poem, the meaning is believed to be taken from the plain word. In Old English literature, gar appears in both compounds as garsig, literally spearman, often used for warrior, showing how closely the weapon was tied to fighting and identity. Most runologists, including Page and Barnes, treat gar as a late addition to the Futhorc, likely created for manuscript use to represent the sound rather than inherited symbolic use. The Anglo-Saxon Futhorc carried the runic tradition into early medieval England and Frisia, adapting the older set as Old English and Old Frisian as the languages developed. It expanded far beyond the elder Futhark's 24 symbols and the later younger Futhorc 16. The Futhorc added new shapes and sounds of a growing language, some of them quite intriguing. In fact, some of the older meanings shifted, or even faded into obscurity, or were lost entirely. We have seen these runes appear in inscriptions, grave goods, and the Old English Rune Poem, showing that writing, memory, and identity were tied to everyday life. With this series coming to a close, the early English branch of the runic story comes to an end, marking both continuity with the past and innovating in a new land. Thank you for joining me on this amazing journey, which started with the elder Futhark, into the younger, and finally the Futhorc. I'm not quite sure what I have on the docket next, but follow for the next runic series.